Welcome to another episode of Preferred Walk On. I'm your host, Max Chadwick. So I've interviewed players on the show before. I've interviewed media personalities on the show before. This guy does both of them. Jake Butt, who's now an analyst for the Big Ten Network, former Michigan tight end, former Denver Broncos tight end, former John Mackey Award winner. Jake, I got to tell you, I'm a huge Penn State fan, man. You terrorized my Nittany Lions for a number of years. But it's cool finally to be able to talk to you, man.
Yeah. The feeling's mutual. Excited to chop it up, man. Excited. I'm sure we'll get into it. Talking about the Big Ten Conference, both of our teams, man. I'm really bullish on Penn State this year. So we'll see. I got a buddy that I played tight end with, Adam Brenneman, who's also in this media space. Also played tight end. We go back and forth all the time. So I'm glad we can be cordial and be friendly.
I don't promise to be cordial. I don't know if I'm going to promise to be cordial just yet. But
All
Adam
right.
Brenneman, another guy that I love. Yeah, he's another superstar. Hopefully, I get him on the show too. But listen, man, I mean, I mentioned it. You were an absolute freaking superstar at Michigan, and I just wanted to ask you first before we get into obviously this upcoming season. What was your time like at Michigan? And Coach Harbaugh obviously is very unabashedly himself. Do you have any funny like Coach Harbaugh stories too when you were at Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, I got a little bit of everything at Michigan. The year I committed, which is when I'd say I started my journey, Michigan goes 11-2. They beat Ohio State. They win the Sugar Bowl. Looked like the program was ascending. My first 2 years there were under Brady Hoke.
Mm-hmm.
Not the case. We went 7-6, then we went 5-7. That was frustrating. I certainly didn't expect that. And then Jim Harbaugh comes in, and you're right. Just to be himself in all situations. That's exactly. I think you said unabashedly Jim Harbaugh. That's a good way to put it. Um, a story to just emphasize that, man, is what he's really good at is turning around programs. So he used to have this phrase. He overheard someone say less is more, and he thought that was BS, man. It pissed him off. He's like, that there's no such thing as less is more, only more is more. So Jim likes to push the rules. Whatever the rules say, he's trying to find a way within the language that's legal to make the rules work for him. So very first spring ball, there's time constraints per NCAA rules, and they say you can only be in the building for 4 hours per day. Most schools do an hour and a half of meetings and then 2.5 hours of practice. Jim said, "Oh, we can be in here for 4 hours? Well, we're going to have a 4 hour practice." Not only that, it was 4 hours per individual person. So he cut the team into two. He had a B team and he had an A team. The B team would come out and do a 2 hour practice all by themselves. Then the A team would join them and they'd overlap. And then the A team would stay for the remainder of their 4 hours for the next 2 hours. And that was all 15 practices. And I think the beauty in that is it's certainly lunacy. And I mean, we had coaches that had back spasms, some coaches were in walkers. It was tough on them to be standing in their feet. The beauty in it, though, is you find out very quickly who you can count on and who actually wants to be a part of winning football and who wants to turn the program around. Everyone can do it for the first hour, and most guys can do it for the second hour. But that in that third and fourth hour, you can see very clearly the 30, 40 guys that you're going to be able to count on to win football games.
So you mentioned it before, like how he tries to kind of weed guys out like that. And I've talked to a number of Michigan players already, and they've all told me, listen, man, yeah, he's hard on us sometimes, but also he's one of the most fun coaches to be around too. Was he kind of like that in your meeting rooms a lot of times? Just, a really awesome guy just to hang out with.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like you said, it and how we just talked about, he is who he is in all situations. So he's kind of quirky. That's a word that comes up. He's like sneakily funny. And you can't really, there's an art to it because you can't always tell if he's joking or not. And the good thing is especially in recent history for Michigan, he's that much more funny and that much more friendly when they're winning. We'd go on road trips and he's like, guys, you don't need to pack your bag. You need your toothbrush, your wallet, and an extra pants of underwear, an extra pair of underwear. The rest, you just go out there and play ball. So just another example of his quirkiness.
I love that, man. So obviously you play for the Denver Broncos for a little bit. Now you're a college football analyst, and I was watching you a ton, obviously, on the Big Ten Network this past season. I mean, you were immediately successful, I think, in that role. How would you say that transition was going from a guy who's on the field to now a guy who's talking about all the players on the field? Now, how was that transition for you?
It was pretty seamless. My first opportunity, which kind of effectively acted as an interview, was to call the Michigan spring game last season. And from that, it built out. They gave me an offer, went all in. I called, 10, 11, 12 games last year, had 40 studio appearances. I did some Sirius XM radio. I still do that. And then I worked for a streaming platform called Stadium, where we do a bi-weekly national college football show. So I kind of dove headfirst into this career, and it went really well. Love talking ball, man. Love watching ball. And I'm one of the lucky ones where I get paid to do something I really love. So seamless transition. There is an art to it. You can't just go out there and think you're going to BS your way to being a good analyst. You do have to study. You do have to prepare, especially for games. You better know names, storylines. You better watch tape. So all that played a factor into it. And, it was a big piece for why I was able to have such a good year. And I'll, re-upped on all my contracts. So I'm hoping to continue to build on it.
Hell yeah, man. I love that. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, there is hard work that goes into it, but it's kind of crazy that you and I can just talk about college football for a living. And that's the job that we have right now, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, man. So let's get into some of the Big Ten stuff now. Obviously, not this year, but the year after that, Big Ten is going to look a lot different. USC, UCLA are coming in. They're talking about adding some other teams as well. What do you think this Big Ten conference could look like in the near future?
So it'll look a lot different for every reason you just mentioned. And we have a schedule announcement today about potentially doing away with divisions. And that's a big change. Obviously, you mentioned USC, UCLA. That's a big change. To me, it seems like this is only the beginning, right? I don't think moves will be rushed, but I'd imagine there is more expansion at some level. So I think we're at the beginning of seeing not just the Big Ten Conference, but really on a national level, a changing college football landscape. I wonder if the players unionize from an NIL standpoint. I wonder if there's a revenue split down the line. So I think we're in the thick of a change. For some people, change is uncomfortable. I think for everybody, at some level, change is uncomfortable, but it's necessity, it's necessary, and it's inevitable. And I'm really excited about it, especially with the two new additions in USC and UCLA. I like the matchups that have conference title implications. I like watching games that have national title implications. So the more you can put good on good, I think it's going to be a better product. It's better for the players. Sure, it's going to be a little bit more stressful for the players and coaches, but as a fan and an analyst, I love it, and I can't wait to see.
Dude, I can't wait for the vibes of a USC at Iowa in like November. That would just be an unbelievable vibes there. But I don't think the Big Ten's done yet, man. They're talking about adding other schools like potentially Oregon, Washington, and other schools like that. If you had a dream at any school, what would be another school that you would love to add to the Big Ten Conference?
Oof. That's a good question. I think Notre Dame would probably be my number one school. I'd put them above all else. Mm-hmm. One, I have some loyalty there. My grandfather, my papa played for Frank Leahy back in the 40s. Actually, he's in Ripley's Believe It or Not. Here's a fun fact. He never lost a game from 8th grade all the way through college.
Wow.
Never lost a game. The worst he did was tie. So he won 2 national championships. Would love to see them. There's that organic rivalry. Notre Dame USC is a rivalry. Notre Dame Michigan is a rivalry. Ohio State, Notre Dame have played in the past. Like, I'd love to see that school. They just seem like a perfect marriage to the Big Ten. And I think, man, that'd be a great addition.
Absolutely, man. So let's get into some on-field stuff for this year. I am super bullish on your Wolverines this year. I actually think they're winning the national championship this season. Do you think Michigan has what it takes to finally get over that hump, not only win the Big Ten, not only make the college football playoff, which they've done in the last 2 years? Do you think they finally have what it takes to get over the hump and win it all this year?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was calling their spring game this year, and, ESPN has these, their little analytics where they talk about who's most likely to win the conference. And, they picked Ohio State, and respect to the Buckeyes. I think they have a good team and a good roster and a good coach in Ryan Day, but I don't know how you can pick any at all, if any teams above Michigan, looking at what they've done these past 2 years and the momentum they have, and then what they're returning, right? You're returning the 5th most production of any school in the country, and that's the 5th most production from a team who went to the college football playoffs, who were back-to-back Big Ten champions, who beat Ohio State 2 years in a row. Not only that, you got both your coordinators back, so there's structure and continuity throughout the program. I think JJ's ready to take a big leap as a quarterback. I think you have the best backfield in all of college football in Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum. And their 2-deep offensive line, that second unit, I've been saying this, I don't think people really understand how good they are. that second offensive line unit would start at 80% of the country. They would start. They're that good. So, and they just got a new addition. The one place I thought they were thin was cornerback, and they just got a new addition to shore up that a big time transfer portal get to shore up that cornerback room. So they're in great position. I think they're going to play a little bit angry because of the fact that they felt that they should have been in the national championship last year and should have beat TCU. I think that's only going to benefit them this year, man. They're going to keep that taste in their mouth and go out there and try to, right some of those mistakes.
It's amazing that you look at all the rankings right now. I feel like people are just forgetting about Michigan. They're talking about Georgia, they're talking about Ohio State, they're talking about Alabama making a jump without Bryce Young, and they're kind of just forgetting about the Wolverines. I feel like a little bit too. But one of the schools I just mentioned before, Ohio State, brand new transition now. Obviously, they got a new quarterback and probably Kyle McCord to take over from CJ Stroud, but he's got probably the two best receivers in college football to throw to in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka. What do you think the Buckeyes will look like in this post CJ Stroud era? And do you think they can overtake Michigan and finally beat them this year and win the Big Ten?
And I'd say to add to that, they got the running back, a good running back room as well. So Jim Knowles showed defensively some progress, but Michigan got the best of them in the biggest moments. And in those rivalry games, they come down to moments. And Michigan, when the moments were the biggest, Michigan showed up and were able to beat Ohio State just from those handful of plays. That's what separates two great teams. So listen, I think if you had to pick right now, Michigan's earned the right to say, no, you have to beat us. And on paper, I think Michigan's returning more talent and has more continuity throughout their roster. So they would be my pick to win the conference. But you have to respect a program like Ohio State because of what they've done. Yes, it'll probably be McCord, but whoever it is will benefit from a system. Ryan Day, even going back to Urban Meyer, Ohio State has a system in place that allows the quarterback to flourish. And you mentioned, here's just a couple things I'd look at with a quarterback. Do you have talent around you? Do you have receivers to throw the football to? Do you have a running game? Well, yeah, you meant that's the best player in college football in Marvin Harrison Jr. Emeka Egbuka is part of the best receiver room in all of college football. You got talent on the running back. The only piece here is they lost 3 offensive linemen to the draft. And that affects twofold. One, if you can't run the ball, that's going to put more pressure on your quarterback. They're going to be able to run the ball, but how consistently and how can they do it against the better defenses? You're looking at the offensive line. Can you protect your quarterback, especially early in the season? You want to keep a clean pocket so he can build that confidence and get the ball out to his receivers. So a lot of this is going to fall on the offensive line, I think, even more so than their quarterback, whoever it is under center initially, to set the ceiling of this team. I think the offensive line is going to be a big piece to watch out for to see how far the Buckeyes can go this year.
That's a great point. I think the offensive line is something that not a lot of people are talking about right now. They lose both tackles. They lose their starting center. All 3 of those guys were absolute superstars too. So I'm like they're average picks. Players. Yeah,
exactly. They're not just on a roster. Those guys are high draft picks, very well respected, and will all have good NFL careers.
Exactly, man. Well, listen, like I mentioned before, I'm a huge Penn State fan. A lot of Penn State fans are saying this is the year that Penn State, finally beats Michigan, finally beats Ohio State, wins the Big Ten, crashes the college football playoff. I don't know if I'm ready to go that far because I mentioned before, I'm super high in Michigan. Like I think you are too. But do you think those Penn State fans are a little insane to be thinking, hey, this is the year that we finally need to get over the hump?
I don't like. I know what you're saying. I don't like words like that because that's what you should think if you're Penn State right now. You look at this. It was a successful year last year, right? Like that's not a bad season by almost every metric in the history of the game. What Penn State did last year was have a great year. And then the better part of this is you return so much of that roster again. So much of your success was on young freshman, sophomore talent that are now going to come back and make that big leap. One of the better young running back rooms in the country, probably the best underclassmen room now that Michigan's guys are juniors and seniors, probably the best underclassmen running back room in the conference, if it's not Maryland, right? So they're talented there. They return a great offensive line and brought in some great offensive linemen in the recruiting class. That's been something that's affected them. So that's going to be a big piece forward. It all falls on Drew Aller. Can he live up to that 5-star potential? But as we've talked about with Ohio State, it's the pieces around a quarterback. Ohio State has great talent around their quarterback, but the offensive line, we're going to have to watch it. Penn State, Great O-line, great running backs. You got some solid tight ends. The question for me is they don't have Marvin Harrison Jr. They lost some guys to the draft. I want to see what that receiver room looks like. Who's going to be Drew Aller's go-to guy in critical situations? I think Manny Diaz did a great job with their defense last year. Kalen King will be their new cornerback number one. So I'm excited to see this come together. But that's a roster that can make a serious run. They can beat anyone, and they should feel they can beat anyone on their schedule. Now it's about going out there and doing it.
I love that, man. That made me feel a lot better about my Nittany Lions going into next year. But I feel like when we talk about the Big Ten, we always mention Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, the three East schools. Not a lot of people talk about the Big Ten West, except, they're going to the Big Ten championship game, obviously, every single year. Who do you think is coming out of that West division this year?
Pick your poison, man. I can make a case for Wisconsin. I can make a case for Iowa. I can make a case for, hey, does Nebraska take a leap? Can Illinois make that next step? What about Minnesota? Maybe Northwestern. They made some new pieces, right? Probably if I had to pick, it'd be between Iowa and Wisconsin. Those would be my two picks. So pick your poison, though, because that West has always been very congested, and you're waiting for someone to consistently separate. So we'll be watching that throughout the season.
I think the school that can eventually consistently separate in that division is probably Wisconsin, man. I love Luke Fickell. I think he's going to turn that, program into a really good powerhouse in the Big Ten. How high are you on Wisconsin's future with that new head coach and Luke Fickell, who I consider to be, I think, one of the 10 best coaches in college football?
Oh, man, I think that, yeah. And I thought that was the best hire in all of college football going into the offseason. I've said this a number of times where I felt Wisconsin was a team that had kind of been banging their head against the ceiling, right? Good, even great at times, but they hadn't got over that hump. They hadn't achieved a college football playoff berth. So what do? You go out and get a coach in Luke Fickell who's walked that path and been to the college football playoff. So he's got the track record to say he can get there. Then the big thing is, you're replacing Jim Leonhard defensively. Well, Fickell is a defensive guy. So, all right, Jim Leonhard was great, but I still am confident in the defense. The question is can you have a dangerous, explosive offense? And they go out and get Phil Longo, the offensive coordinator. You go out and get Tanner Mordecai, the quarterback. You still have Braylon Allen. You return a significant amount of production in your receiver room and added some guys in the portal. So I'm expecting this offense to be significantly more dynamic, an ability to threaten you and scare you on the edge and through the passing game. And we know what Braylon Allen will do. So I think that's where you look at it. This defense has been solid. The running game has been solid. The passing game's here. Well, the passing game has a lot of room for improvement, and I expect it for all those reasons we just said, that passing game is going to increase its production 50, 60, 70%. What does that mean in terms of more wins? I'd imagine at least a couple more with a chance to make a serious run.
I can't wait to watch an air raid concept at Wisconsin, man. That's going to look
Crazy.
so weird on that field, but I'm excited for what they have in store for sure. You mentioned Braylon Allen. I mean, I think he is a super dark horse for the Heisman Trophy. I think Blake Corum is a guy who's being slept on a lot for the Heisman Trophy too. Yeah. If you had to say, though, who do you think are the top Heisman contenders in the Big Ten next year?
Yeah, those would be the two: Braylon Allen, Blake Corum. I have to give some respect. A guy like JJ McCarthy, man, if he's got that ability and capability to take that next leap, I think he's someone that needs to be considered. Is it someone from Penn State? Is it one of those guys we talked about? Can Drew Aller have a great season? That's probably going out on a limb and saying he's got a chance at it, but he's a 5-star for a reason. Is it one of their running backs? If I had to pick, it's probably between Blake Corum, Marvin Harrison Jr. would be another great one. Those would be the guys that stand out to me and come about right away. Of course, Iowa's going to have a good football team, but very rarely do they have that dynamic person that can make a serious run at the Heisman. But probably Blake, probably JJ, probably Marvin Harrison Jr. It would be your picks right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Iowa always has the great tight ends, I'm sure, as you know, too. So I love Luke Leakey. I think he's going to be a great tight end for them this upcoming season. But, there's no shortage of superstars in the Big Ten Conference. But what do you think are some underrated players that we should be keeping an eye out for this upcoming season?
I think Cade McNamara is a guy that's extremely underrated. And I think what you're going to see is a new Iowa offense. Not new, not anything sexy. They're still going to be Iowa, but I think the offensive line will be much improved. I think Cade is a excellent, very solid quarterback. You feel good when Cade McNamara is in the huddle from a leadership standpoint. You feel good in terms of his ability to spread the ball around. He's got his guy, Eric All. He's got Luke Lachey, like you mentioned, at tight end. I think that offense is going to be much, much improved. So I'm excited to see those two guys go out there. And I think Roman Hemby, the running back from Maryland as well. It's just Maryland doesn't get that national attention, right? But he silently had an excellent year last year and looked explosive in their spring game this year. I think he's a guy that can make a big leap forward as well.
So obviously there's a lot of turnover at the quarterback position in the Big Ten. Obviously, JJ McCarthy's coming back, but who do you think are your top 3 quarterbacks you've got to pick right now in the Big Ten conference next year?
So the two immediately that jump out are JJ McCarthy and Talia Tagovailoa in Maryland. And then the question is who's the next man up? Is it Cade McNamara? Is it Tanner Mordecai? Is it Jeff Sims? All those guys are transfers and new to the conference. Is it a Kyle McCord because he's part of the system and can come in and make that splash? Is it Drew Aller, right? I think the top 2 are pretty solidified in JJ and Talia Tagovailoa. The question is who's the next man up? Who can make that next leap? So I think it's the 2, and then we're going to have to wait and see.
So I want to get your picks right now. Who do you think is going to be the offensive player of the year in the Big Ten, and who do you think will ultimately be the defensive player of the year in the Big Ten? You have to pick right now.
Yeah, if I had to pick right now, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. Is the pick to be the offensive player of the year. Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards could be that, but the benefit for them is they have each other. In terms of the offensive player of the year, the hard thing is they have each other because they're gonna have to split those reps. Defensively, that's always so much harder, man. It depends. Is it a defensive back that comes out and has a bunch of interceptions like a Kalen King? Is it a defensive lineman that steps up and has a number of sacks? Is it a linebacker that does a little bit of everything? That one's a little bit tougher. I couldn't pick with a huge degree of confidence there. Sorry, but I'd say Marvin Harrison Jr. is a pretty likely pick to be the offensive player of the year.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty safe bet. A guy I love on defense, the Illinois D tackle, Drazon Newton. I was able to talk to him. He is an absolute superstar, too. So we talked about it before, man. You are obviously as high on Michigan, I think, as I am this year. Do you ultimately think they win the Big Ten, make the playoff, and do you think they win the national championship this year?
If I had to make the pick right now, I think, I'm picking Michigan to win the Big Ten championship. I'd pick them to be undefeated throughout the regular season. The 2 games that you're looking at is obviously Ohio State. You're going on the road to Penn State, so those would be 2 big challenges for them. But the roster's so talented, the leadership's so mature, the coaching staff has been there. So I'd pick them to run the table, and then I would say I'm going to pick them to go to the national championship game, at least get to the playoffs, right? So I think that's where I can stick you. If I had to give you my final 4, and just to get in the dance, I think Michigan gets there for sure, and then we're going to have to see at that point who's in that final 4.
Who do you ultimately – I know you're a national college football guy too. Do you have any other playoff picks for next year that will join Michigan in that playoff?
I think USC gets there as well. I think Georgia – look at Georgia's schedule. It's crazy how the way that fell in place for them. So if I had to pick it, I'm looking at – they're replacing a lot too, though. I'd pick Michigan with a degree of confidence. I'm picking USC, Georgia, and then there's a handful of teams. Alabama is one that stands out. Ohio State, obviously. LSU, I think, is a sneaky team. Is it a Florida State as well? Can Clemson get back on track? I think I'm covering a good basis picking those teams. Or is it a team out of the West like a Wisconsin? Can they make that leap this year? But I would feel pretty good that it's going to be Michigan, USC, and Georgia. The 4th one's going to be a little bit tougher.
I agree. I think Michigan, USC, Georgia would be my picks too. I ultimately think, man, I think Florida State's gonna finally do it this year. I'm so in on them. Obviously, you were a superstar tight end, Jake. Are there any tight ends in college football, maybe like a Brock Bowers, Brevin Spanford from Minnesota? I love that guy too. Who are the tight ends in college football that you think are the best and that you just love watching on Saturdays?
Yeah, those are the 2 you just mentioned right there. Those are the 2 that jump out immediately. Just sticking in the Big Ten Conference, Eric All he's injured last year, but we saw what he was capable of the year before, and now he's in the Iowa system. So him and Luke Lachey, I think, are going to make a splash. I'm going to stick with my guy, in Ann Arbor and say Colston Loveland, just watch out, because he did not play like a freshman last year, and he made big plays in big moments. I think he's going to take a big leap forward. So I'm definitely forgetting some guys and leaving some off the list, but I think the list I just gave you right there and that we talked about covers some damn good tight ends.
So when you're watching Brock Bowers, though, in particular, how special do you think that guy is? Do you think he's ultimately going to be like a Kyle Pitts-esque prospect when he finally enters the NFL draft?
I wouldn't say Kyle Pitts. Well, in terms of that level of prospect, sure. Pitts is that rare breed of athleticism, right? Darren Waller is a lot different than Travis Kelce. Both are great tight ends. Kyle Pitts is different than Brock Bowers. Both are great tight ends. I couldn't believe what Bowers was doing as a freshman. You talk about you need to stay 3 years in college to be drafted. That's a hard position for guys, even after their third, fourth, fifth year in college, to make it to the pros. Had he been eligible to leave after his freshman year, he would have been a first-round pick. He's that talented. And nothing shows that more than the fact they're giving him jet sweeps as the tight end position, right? That talks about the rarity. He can do everything the tight end wants you to do, within the traditional lines of playing the position. But then you got a guy, you're giving him jet sweeps and he's taking it 60 plus yards to the house. Yeah, dude, special.
He is absolutely special. Jake, this is an awesome interview, man. I really appreciate you taking out the time.
No problem.